Welcome to the 322nd episode of the Jamie Delaney Plant-Based Wellness Podcast. My name is Jamie Delaney, and I'm your host. I'm a plant-based cardiologist and endurance athlete living in Southwest Florida. Welcome, and thank you for listening. Well, we had a great time with our fall webinar last week. We made an apple steel cut oatmeal. We did a quinoa sweet potato kale Buddha bowl. We did pumpkin pancakes. We did a gingerbread. We did pumpkin seed encrusted tofu. So it was a great evening. Addie was in for that. So the webinar was live from our Port Charlotte office, and we had a really good time. And I think people got some really good ideas of what to do for the fall, because again, like I told you last time, or talked about last time, this is eating season, right? The beginning of eating season. Halloween is just around the corner. If you go in the grocery store, the aisles are packed with Halloween candy. A tremendous amount of Halloween candy. And really none of it's vegan. None of it's plant-based. Most of it's milk chocolate. Most of it has whey protein. Lots of it oil, lots of sugar, right? So none of it is really good for you. There are vegan candies, sweet tarts, and some of those, jelly type candies, I suspect they are vegan. But the Hershey stuff and the Dove stuff, those aren't vegan. So if you're going to declare yourself plant-based, those are hard no's that you have to accept. A lot of people, in the past, I know, when I used to buy Halloween candy to give out, it was, what do you like the best? What do you want to get stuck with? And of course, we all have childhood memories of going trick-or-treating and what you used to get and what houses, used to have the really good stuff. And, I can remember coming home and taking the bag and, kind of counting it and sorting it and looking through it. And it was a matter of like looking at it more than it was eating. It was never that big a deal for me. It was the act of going and trick-or-treating that was much more fun than actually eating the candy. And I think that, that's not a bad way around it for kids. If you have a lot of trick-or-treaters, obviously, when I was growing up, people that gave out fruit, you were really worried about, whether they put needles or knives in it or poisoned it, and I guess that's still a thing, unless people are going to next door neighbor houses. But there are a few things I'd like to talk about, that you can make if you're having a Halloween party for people that you know, as opposed to strangers coming to your door. There are candied apples that you can make with date paste and decorate them with raisins and pumpkin seeds and sunflower seeds and do all kinds of fun things. You can make vegetable trays and fruit trays, out of pumpkins. Of course, there's pumpkin chia pudding. There's a whole host of things that you can do. You can make your own energy bars as an idea for, trick-or-treat bars for friends and family. Of course, gingerbread is great. Pumpkin bread is great. There's all kinds of things you can do with your family at home. Kids coming to your door, it's kind of a different story. It's a tough call. In the past, I've had Cliff bars or some sort of, little bar that's, fairly good. Nature's Way makes a fig type bar that are in packages. Those are some things that you can give to people that aren't tremendously bad. You might not be the best candy giver on the block, but you can have a conscious saying that you're not, you're not giving the stuff out that you wouldn't give to your own kids. I do think it's probably, a discussion to have with kids as they get older, as far as how do you responsibly eat things like that. How do you, it's like, we'll talk a little bit about alcohol in a little bit, but I think sometimes when you deny kids certain things, they end up wanting it more, and they're certainly they're going to be exposed to things when they go out. I think having the discussion as far as, where dairy comes from, health, why we choose to eat the way that we do, it makes, eating the other way not such a mystery that kids need to get in and get all that they can. If you have kids that are older and you became plant-based and, they've already eaten the junk food, again, the conversation of why we're choosing not to do it and how you limit things, I think is important. It's not the end of the world if a kid has a sweet treat, but you don't want the child to not be able to stop or have an abnormal relationship with food. So you got to be careful. I think putting it in context and establishing your own home traditions is always a good way around it. We don't want to belittle other people's choice, but we want to be comfortable in our own choices. I wanted to talk a little bit today about motivation from within and motivation from others, because I think both are really important when it comes to obtaining ultimate health and wellness. I am a huge believer that we are a pack animal. We need to be together. We need to get energy from each other and give each other energy and positive feedback and positive motivation. I also think that there's a lot that we need to do when we're by ourselves to self-motivate and keep ourselves on track and not depend entirely on other people to be our moral or our nutrition compass, so to speak. One of the things as far as motivation from other people, in the practice, we have a Facebook page, a private Facebook page, and we do wellness challenges, and we do post recipes and post different encouraging, and have people post their food that they're eating. And I think that is really good in that when people post what they've made and they played it and they're proud of it and other people chime in and give them feedback, I think that's a great opportunity to motivate other people and to get motivation from people. It's not secondary nature to a lot of people, the age group of our practice and Facebook. It's not, people, people talk about the lurkers, people that look but don't comment. There's certainly a number of people that make comments. There are a lot of people that look and don't make comments. I don't think that they realize the potential to motivate others by making a positive comment or giving positive feedback. I think that that's really important when you're part of a group, not only to look and see what other people are doing, but also to give positive feedback. I've been on some Facebook groups, with my animals, and people just really tear down people when they're not spot on what they say, or they're always correcting, or always but you could do this or you could do that, or don't do this, or how could you do that. I don't think that's the forum to do that. I don't think that helps anybody. But I think positive feedback when somebody posts a recipe or does a particular endurance, they post what they've done, if they've done a race or something. I think that people can get a lot of good motivation from that. If nothing else, know that you're not an island. And especially during COVID, in the plant-based community, people, there aren't that many people that are plant-based, and there may not be that many people that walk or run or do endurance activities in your area. So sharing those in a particular group, I think, can be very helpful. We also have we've started plant-based striders on Facebook. You don't have to be a member of the practice to, log in and see what's going on in the plant-based striders. And, it's really difficult to keep it going, to get people to post and to keep up, sharing what they've done. A lot of people feel that, well, they're showing off if they've done a big run or maybe did something that was, extraordinary, or maybe they feel that it's not extraordinary enough. But it's just a matter of posting that, hey, we're out here and we're trying. You motivate a lot of other people. And I think that it's, again, I wish that we could get those groups going more from a plant-based aspect of things, and people would be less critical. I think people are afraid because they're going to be criticized sometimes or thought of as not being worthy enough. But I don't think that could be further from the truth. I like to look at various sites. I get motivation from different ultra groups and what people have done and trails that they've run on. I like looking at a particular Instagram site called Inflexible Yogis. I think that it's a great site and that they show the progression of a pose. So it starts out where, people can't hardly get into even part of the position. And then over the years, they make it to finally they have this great pose that they've mastered. But they also show the steps along the way. So they're not afraid to show the struggle, and then they show how they went about doing it. And I think that's a good site for motivation to see that other people struggle, but then they succeed if you keep working at it, and it doesn't happen overnight. I think that's really important for everybody to understand, is that when somebody looks a certain way or does a certain thing, it doesn't mean that they were born doing it or that they were good at it from the get-go. And we've all told our kids that you've got to practice and you've got to learn, and you get better as you do things. But somehow, somewhere as an adult, we start to get squeamish about it. And if we're not good right up front, we don't want anybody to see our failures or our weaknesses. And, I think that that's unfortunate because, again, a lot of people get motivation from other people's struggles. Nobody just wants to see the guy winning. They want to see how he got to that point. I don't think it matters what age a group is. You can apply it to yourself. You can adjust things for you. Addie Delaney Meinerich, she does a lot of weightlifting. Her husband Nathan is a strength coach, and they're participating in an event called Squattober, which there's a guy from Sorinex, which is a company that makes weightlifting equipment, that puts out a workout every day for the month of October. And you can try it, and he encourages people to participate and put pictures up and show what they've done. There's another group that I look at, Kelly Starrett, the Ready State, that does different mobility things, and he puts up a progression, and he asks people to post in it. I think when there's a dialogue, when people are doing things together and a sense of community, even if you don't know the people, it can be a lot of fun, and you can get a lot of motivation. I've decided to join in my own little version of the Squattober. I'm not going to be doing the weights of the young kids. I don't have, but I'll be going and doing it. It holds my feet to the fire to do some of the activities that I wouldn't do. We do a wellness challenge every month. I try to follow those and check in because it becomes a motivation for me to do things and change things up and keep things fresh. So I've encouraged you to, utilize some of these groups to your benefit, but also give feedback so that you can motivate other people. It is important that you give feedback because your voice is encouraging to other people. It comes down to you have to give a little bit to get, if you give a little, you tend to get a lot back. If you're just looking to get, then chances are you're not going to get as much if you're not giving. And I think that, most of life, most people know that are listening to that podcast, you get such a benefit of giving to others, whether it be your time or your resources, or again, just a little positive feedback, makes a huge difference in somebody else's life. And that energy comes back 100-fold to you to motivate you to keep doing good things. And, example would be the weight training or the running. A lot of people follow Strava and different things and give feedback to other people. But nutrition is the same way. When you see somebody that's made something that's good, comment on it. Share some of your own recipes. I think it's really important that, again, you motivate people and use that energy to keep you going. Because if somebody, if you get to know somebody and you post something, then it gives you, put your feet to the fire a little bit to post something else or to show them how you're doing, or perhaps keep up the weight loss journey that you're doing, or keep up the exercise journey that you're doing. There was a push-up challenge that I participated in. You nominate other people, and then, it becomes good. You can do Garmin groups. You can do Fitbit groups. But I think that those groups can be very beneficial to people, even if they're not in person. Motivation from within is the mind games that we all have to play to get us out the door in the morning, to get one more mile, to get your exercise routine in, to challenge ourselves to do a little bit better. Imaginary people that you compete against. They don't have to be necessarily imaginary, but you see somebody that you don't know and they don't know you exist, but you may compete with them or want to be like them, or draw energy from what their accomplishments are. You may have to bring the bar down a little bit from yourself, or maybe not. You can keep that bar really high and keep striving for it. But I think that's important, that you can always get better, and there's always somebody out there that probably is a little bit better at you at eating or doing something, or doing an endurance activity. But you can keep striving. Just to say that to give up is not going to get you anywhere, or to say that it's not possible, it's not going to get you anywhere. I think a lot of people hang on to, a story perhaps that's not necessarily true, that really can be limiting. I've heard a couple stories this week that, why people are failing to achieve things or are struggling because of the story that they're potentially telling themselves. And while it's true, it's not a lie by any stretch of the imagination, but it's not the whole story, and it's a perspective on a ton of things that have happened to them, but they hang on to a particular events and have weaved why they believe their life has went a certain way, and it continues to go that way because of the story that they've weaved. Whether it's, I don't think I can ever be a normal body mass index, or these things always happen to me when I do this, I have a bad back, I have a bad knee, I'm not flexible, I can't run, I was told I never can do this, can be very limited because you're hanging on to a story that, is not the story that ends all, that be all. There's people that do things that are very limited, but they do them in their own way. I've been posting my t-shirts and medals from marathons for years, but it wasn't until we changed this practice and had wellness challenges and had other people in the practice get to know each other and share their successes that now multiple people want to run a marathon. 20 years of me putting posters up, or 10 years of me putting posters up, nobody ever did anything. But when, you find out that other people can do it, that, people like us do things like this, all of a sudden it's something that people have the courage to try. So you just have to get in your head that little story that if they can do it, I can do it. And, these are the games that you play to get yourself out of the house, to make your own meals. The rules that you put around what you eat. I don't think that scare tactics help at all. I've had people that have had bypasses and they realize they have to change, but it's too hard, they don't. Or maybe they change a little bit for a little bit of time, but then they don't. Or they go back to their old ways. Once the fear of death or dying wears off, then they go back to their old ways. The fear that you have a strong family history doesn't even motivate people. So everybody around them can have an illness and it still doesn't motivate them because there's a little piece inside your story that's saying, yeah, but it happened to them, but it won't happen to me. And so I don't think that fear is a good motivator at all. I think you have to come up with something else that really drives you, that you really want in order to make the change, and then work it until that story becomes, part of you. I remember my first ever race. It was a 5-mile Bill's Beer Run around Halloween, right before my first marathon. My first marathon was in March, so that would have been in October. Because when I decided I was going to run my first marathon, I'd only been running 3 miles at the time. But I read that you have to progress. So you have to do, a 5-mile race, or 3 or 5 mile race, and then a half marathon, or maybe a 10K, and then a half marathon, and then you can do a full marathon. That was a good way to progress. So I signed up for my first race, which happened to be a 5-mile run. And I don't remember the details. Probably when I signed up, I thought 5K and 5 miles were the same thing. I wasn't even thinking about it. But nevertheless, I show up for this 5-mile run, and I didn't know anybody else there, and I grew up a golfer, so I could look at people and I could tell by the way they were practicing on the practice tee if they were good golfers, if they knew what they were doing, perhaps by their clubs, the way they carried themselves or whatever. I could pretty much size up a golfing opponent because that's what I had done most of my life. That was my sport growing up for the most part. But when I showed up for this race, I felt really out of place. And I remember looking at people's feet and seeing their legs and seeing, there wasn't golf shoes and they, their short shorts on and their legs sticking out and the big calves and the thighs and, muscular legs. And I thought, man, I am really out of my element here. If I only could see somebody's golf clubs or see their golf swing, I'd feel a lot more comfortable about, doing this. And, I didn't know much in the way of, the rules or the etiquette or anything about it. And I took off and, I ran the race and finished and, talked to some people and it wasn't quite as bad. Then I signed up for a half marathon and, I still really didn't consider myself a runner because I was training for the marathon and that was going to be my event. So I wasn't a runner until I completed that task. And finally, I did a half marathon, and that was hard. And I couldn't imagine doing a whole marathon after the half marathon. And finally, completed the marathon. And, it was a sense that, okay, I did it and I pulled it off and I had a good time. And now I want to grow from this and maybe get a little faster and do another one. And I started identifying with, the lining up and running with the herd. I had great joy from being around the masses of people and running with complete strangers and people cheering for people that they didn't know. I thought that was just such a great thing. And all the health that was around, people trying to be healthy and what they were doing. And, next thing you know, I was a runner, not a golfer anymore. And, that progressed and ultimately, a friend talked me into doing a triathlon, and then one thing led to another. It was Ironman. And, again, until you complete the task, you say, well, maybe that's not me or that's not who I am. I used to say I'm a runner, not a triathlete, but after you did a few Ironman, it's like, well, yeah, I do triathlon. I am a triathlete as well. You do an endurance event and it's like, okay, I'm an ultra runner as well after you've completed the events. But until you put yourself out there, but you're also drawing from other people the positive energy that you have with them. So, when it comes to nutrition, getting around like-minded people is really important, and being around people that are interested in health and eating that way. And you are who you associate with, and that can be very difficult when everybody around you is not not doing those things. But you have to find some positive energy in that group of people, whether they have a similar athletic likeness or some other hobby that there's a likeness that you draw from them, and then have another group that you can draw your nutrition from. But you have to get energy from people, and then you have to have that own energy from within to say, I really want to do this. I really want to make this goal. I had an older gentleman this week that he wants to live to be 100, but he's not really taking care of himself all that well. Probably has some pretty good genetics, but could do better. Also, likes his sweets and other things. And even though he likes vegetables, he likes his other food as well. And it's difficult for him to stay true to a plant-based diet. His wife would like to, but he complains a lot to the point where she just kind of gave up. And he got to the point where he had an episode where he got very weak and, his blood pressure was up and his sugars were up. And he got all the way to the point where he couldn't hardly get around the house and he was in a wheelchair. And he came in and he really was down in the dumps. He thought that, maybe this is it. I'm not going to make my goal for my age that I want to make. And certainly if I can't make it in a way that I can get out and do things and work in the yard, then I just as soon not live that long if I'm going to be in a wheelchair and I can't do things. And so we had a talk, and it's like, well, there's a lot of things you can still do. We can change your nutrition and make things better and watch the salt, and we'll change your medicines around and hopefully wean you off of insulin. And but you got to help me out here. You got to eat what your wife prepares. You got to not moan about it. And we got to replace, you love fruit. We got to replace the ice cream with fruit and do this and that. Well, the next thing you know, and the other thing we did, we put him on insulin. And the medicine was expensive. So it was a little bit of a rub to the pocketbook. But the idea was if you get your diet under control, then we'll be able to wean you off of this insulin, or at least wean it way down so it's more affordable. So the next thing you know, he comes in and his weight's starting to go down. And, fast forward, he comes in, he's out working in the yard, he's pressure cleaning his deck, and he's back to normal, and his sugars are down, and we're on a low dose of insulin, and he's feeling good. And I said, what changed? And he didn't recognize. And I said, he said, well, I'm out working more. I said, yes, but you couldn't go out and work before. So what changed? And we kept going back and forth. I said, what are you eating different that all of a sudden at, 80 some years of age, that you've lost, 10 pounds and, your blood pressure's under good control and your legs aren't swollen anymore. What's changed? And he's like, well, I'm eating more quinoa. And it's like, you mean quinoa instead of rice? Well, yes. So are you eating less quinoa than you did rice? Well, yeah, probably. It's like, what else? Because that's not going to be it. And it turns out, well, I was eating ice cream every night. So he was eating sugar-free ice cream. And if you've ever looked at sugar-free ice cream, it's very high fat. So he was eating sugar-free ice cream that was very high in fat. And he was eating cookies and crackers and all these other kind of things. And so he stopped that, and his weight came down. He was able to get, his energy came back. And it's like, well, I said, it's not, people want to look to, they want to look to movement as being the cure. And, it's not it's the nutrition. It comes back to what you eat is how you're going to feel, is what you eat. You'll never walk your way into feeling great if you feel bad. So the nutrition is key. It has to be a vital role. The exercise is very helpful, but it's the nutrition. And so finally I was able to pin him down. It's like it's the ice cream, the crackers, the cookies that you've given up, and you've started eating more healthy food that has allowed you to do more and get out and be more active. Had the same thing with another person. They hadn't lost any weight at all, just drifted down and finally changed the way they're eating, and weight started falling off. And so I've heard Dr. Esselstyn say, if the weight's not falling off, then people aren't really paying attention to their nutrition. It is calories in and calories out, but it has to be a steady, concerted effort. It has to be a day in and day out effort. And people do feel better, and they get a tremendous positive boost from being able to accomplish that. But you got to do that in your head first. You've got to have, the day by day little mind games to get yourself to the point where things start to move forward. And then the motivation starts to come easier from within. And until then, you use some motivation from on the outside. But again, you got to play the games. And like Dr. Bolte Taylor will say, you've got to develop a circuit and a story that is congruent with your health goals and your life goals of what you want to do. Again, just wishing that it would magically happen, it's not going to really happen. I talk a lot about running and endurance events, and there was a study done that was just published looking at cycling, and the Journal of the Journal of American Medical Association looked at cycling with all-cause and cardiovascular disease mortality among people with diabetes. And they took the people from the European Prospective Investigation into Cancer Nutrition Studies, called the EPIC study, and they looked at people with diabetes that cycled. And they found that there was at least a 24% lower all-cause mortality rate compared with people that didn't, cycle. And if people took up cycling for a 5-year period, there was actually a 35% decrease in all-cause mortality compared to consistent non-cyclist. And, it was somewhat of a smaller study or smaller cohort, but it didn't really matter how much. And excessive amounts were actually seen to maybe be a little bit more or less beneficial. And again, there's a lot of skewing as far as data collection and things of that nature, but just getting out and cycling on a regular basis showed a profound benefit. There were 7,459 people with diabetes that were included. The average age was 55.9 years, about half were women. And compared to a reference group, the people that cycled more than zero did better. So again, that's a good thing to take up cycling. When they looked at, again, more people, the higher amount of cycling, different confounding variables started to interfere and made that a little bit more difficult to look at. But basically, they looked at from 0 to 300 or more minutes per week in cycling. Exercise is important. Exercise on a consistent basis is important. So, a little bit every day is very beneficial to get into the habit of doing something. A lot of people will go 2 or 3 days, they'll get too sore, then they won't go for another 3 or 4 weeks, or they'll lay off for, 4 or 5 days, and then they don't pick it up for another 6 months, So make it realistic and pick a small, doable amount of time. Pick a time of the day where other things don't seem to get in the way, and block that part out for your exercise routine, whether it be, again, cycling, swimming, walking, running, dancing, whatever, but make that a routine that you do every day that becomes part of your story. I get sent a question about alcohol and atrial fibrillation, and there was a study in Science News that was a very small study with just a couple hundred people, 100 patients with documented atrial fibrillation who had one alcoholic drink a month. They were recruited, and they wore an EKG monitor, and they even had a sensor that would detect their alcohol level, and they periodically had blood tests looking at alcohol consumption, and they found that even one drink was associated with a 2 times higher risk of an atrial fibrillation episode, and 2 or more drinks, a 3-fold higher increase in atrial fibrillation episode. Atrial fibrillation is when the top chamber of the heart quivers at 300 beats per minute and the bottom chamber tries to keep up. Typically, people have elevated heart rates, in the range of 150 to 160. And it's the most common arrhythmia that there is. It is primarily associated with high blood pressure. It's associated with sleep apnea, COPD, any kind of pulmonary disease. It's associated with valvular heart disease. And the question over the years is what exacerbates it? What causes it to occur? Because early on, it kind of comes and goes before it becomes chronic in some people. And people will say that, caffeine drives it. And, people have been told maybe don't drink coffee or alcohol, because alcohol can be very toxic to the heart. And the question is how much alcohol? We know that people that drink a lot during the holidays, it's called holiday heart syndrome. Not only do the heart muscle deteriorate and function, but it can, lead to arrhythmias. So alcohol is certainly toxic on the heart. This study would suggest that a lot lower level is potentially toxic than what we once thought in people that already had arrhythmias. Very small study. You have to look back and say, okay, what is the baseline? How long have these people had atrial fibrillation? What are the other triggers? Other confounding things. But, nevertheless, alcohol is toxic to all parts of the body if consumed in excessive amounts of a quantity. And if people are compromised in any way, then little amounts can cause problems. I take that same approach to people that are already have any lifestyle disease. They don't have the wiggle room to imbibe in activities that a much younger person could get away with, so to speak. Your metabolic, your garage, your cellular damage has occurred and accumulated, and you don't have that much wiggle room. So 3 days being good and 2 days being bad doesn't really fix anything. So people have to be, much more aware of what they're doing. And I think that's with anything, again, whether you're trying to prevent cancer or the recurrence of it, the more risk factors you have, certainly if you've already had cancer, the more you have to dial up your game a notch, to combat some of these lifestyle diseases. And we have people with high blood pressure that just avoiding salt and eating some greens doesn't do it. They have to look at their autonomic nervous system and start to make changes there. People that have high cholesterol that aren't very heavy. And so what's the problem? They don't tolerate much. Your strong family history, you don't have that much wiggle room. So I think, atrial fibrillation is certainly like that as well. If you have a heart that's irritable, alcohol is certainly going to make it worse. It's not in 100% of people. We know the blue zone, people that lived in the blue zone that lived to be well into their hundreds, a lot of those people had a drink a day, or, they would have some alcohol. But again, they also selected themselves out for being older. So they lived a healthy lifestyle. They were still healthy well into their hundreds, even though they didn't overdo or overcrowd their cells with debris to the point where they already had diseases. So they continued to be healthy. And, I guess, one might say that, some people tolerate a little bit of insult. Some people don't tolerate much insult at all. And certainly people that have cardiovascular disease at a young age, you have to be very, very careful. If somebody has made it into their 80s and they don't have any problems, then, they're standing the test of time over some things. And, I think dosages is different for people in different sizes with anything. So you take it with a grain of salt. Alcohol is toxic. That's definite. You can pickle, formaldehyde, and we pickle things with alcohol. And too much of anything is harmful. How much is acceptable is very individual. And again, I think that's, something that we should, hit on again and again and again, that one is not necessarily right for everybody. We have to individualize this. We can't do a protocol for the whole human race. There are variations in what is good for some people and not as good for others, or what some people will tolerate and some people won't. And we can't really extrapolate that. You have to do the best you can do for you. There was another study published this week that looked at statin therapy and the progression of diabetes, and they found that those taking statins, 56%, saw a progression of their diabetes compared with 48% of those not taking statins. And the higher the dose of statin, the more the diabetes progressed, and to the point of needing insulin. And, the researcher said that's not a reason not for people not to take statins. It is a reason for people to perhaps look at other risk factors for cardiovascular disease. So if they take statins, in light of smoking, blood pressure as well, those things need to be controlled for, and that you can treat glucose, and maybe it's better to take a statin and get diabetes and take medicine for your diabetes than to have a heart attack because you have vascular disease from hyperlipidemia. I'd have to disagree with that. That analysis, I think that, diabetes is basically, adult onset diabetes is the inability of glucose to get into the cell. The receptor is blocked, and the receptor is blocked with fat. Therefore, your pancreas has to put out more insulin, and insulin is really the bad player. Insulin drives the production of inflammatory compounds, interleukins. It drives cancer-causing tumor necrosis factors, other proteins that increase the risk of cancer. It drives blood vessel growth and inflammation. So just having an increased glucose or controlling the glucose another way doesn't take away the basic problem with diabetes, in that there's too much insulin around, and the insulin is a bad player. So I think you really have to think hard, because all of these conditions are, again, treatable with nutrition and dietary modification and exercise. So you can get rid of your diabetes and your high cholesterol by diet and exercise in the majority of people. So, I spend a lot of time in my practice trying to get people off their off their statin medications as well as their diabetic medications. And for the most part, we can do that. And I think to keep people on a statin just because they're at risk and drive their cholesterol, down to 90 or 100, I think that's overkill. I think you're more likely to do harm than good. There's always a downside from giving medication to artificially lower a number. There's always going to be a backside. So again, diet and nutrition always wins as far as risk factor modification for cardiovascular disease in my book. Unfortunately, in medicine, we have a tendency to flog an organ to make it produce more. Most of diabetic medications are aimed at the pancreas to put out more insulin, or aimed at the liver to produce less glucose, when we're really not addressing the problem, which is, nutritional, and why we have the problem in the first place. And I think it's a good lesson to learn that if you flog the pancreas over time to put out more insulin, it ultimately fails and quits producing insulin at all. And then people have to take insulin for the rest of their lives. If people have a really bad heart and we give them medicine to kind of flog the heart to beating harder, then the heart tends to secrete factors, adrenaline-like factors, that cause the heart to actually get worse quicker. So anytime we flog the body, and I'm going to turn this to the immune system, if we flog the immune system to produce more and more antibodies to more and more different things, at what point is the immune system not going to participate when we really need it? And so people, I think we're learning through some of the studies that are out there that people that are immunocompromised aren't really having a strong antibody reaction to the vaccine, partly because their immune system has already been damaged. And so by flogging it more, are we really doing them any favors? So if you again go back to one size fits all, it's just not true. And I think that you have to, when you look at your neighbor and when you start looking at people, have you been vaccinated or haven't you been vaccinated? You don't know the backstory and you don't know their individual needs. And certainly a pharmacist who is not a patient's doctor and cannot prescribe or treat or doesn't even know the patient other than their insurance card. Your neighbor doesn't know you or your background. So I believe that people should be treated according to their needs and their problems and be individualized as opposed to one-size-fits-all medicine. And that's how we practice it in our membership group. It's not one-size-fits-all. It's not a protocol that we plug everybody into. Everybody's different. Everybody comes with their own set of stories and problems that's unique to them, their own mindsets, and we have to be able to meet people where they are and help them to get well accordingly to their own speed that they need to get, and their abilities, and individualize their therapies according to their wants and needs. Whether you want to live to be 100 or you want to live 5 years and make it really good, or you want to burn out like a candle in the wind. It's your choice. It's always your choice. And so I'm going to leave you with this, that your medical care should be individualized for you and you only. And you should be your own advocate for your own health care. And you should always ask why. And is this going to be good for me, or if this isn't going to be good for me? And do what I say approach is something that went out in the 50s. So be your own healthcare advocate. Get out and cheer somebody else on. Give some positive feedback to other people on some of your groups that you belong to. Interact with others, because there's no better way to get positive energy than interacting with other human beings. Be kind to each other. You never know what trouble somebody else has behind the curtain. So be supportive, and I'll talk to you next week. Thanks for listening. If you want to hear more about our practice, go over to drdelaney.com, DOCTORDULANEY.com. We'd love to have you as a member. You can look again, social media. I'm Jamila Delaney on Facebook and Instagram. We also have Plant-Based Striders if you'd like to get some motivation from that group. And we'd love to see you in March at the Treasure Coast Marathon to run with us. That would be really cool. Also be running several races in Texas. So hope to see you out there sometime. Thanks for listening.